Often our sense of overwhelm comes from comparing the world as it is, or at least the world as we perceive it to be, with the world as we think it should be, and the world that environmentalists think they think it should be. And there's a couple of things with this. As far as I can tell, there have been doomsayers in the world. From the Old Testament on, the prophets that went out into the desert and came back to castigate the culture that they had come from and point out the wickedness of the ways of the culture and the displeasure of these ways in the eyes of God, and telling their fellows to repent, to change their behaviors. And I'm sure in other religions that I'm not as familiar with, there has been this same sense of doom and gloom as a particular way of looking at the world. And I think that's a valid way of looking at the world. But I don't think it's the only way of looking at the world. I respect Chris Hedges enormously for his honesty and his clear vision, but I'm not sure that his vision is the only valid vision. There is this other sense that human beings, since the beginning of these doomsayers, have somehow muddled through, that we've pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps, that we do somehow confront these enormous challenges that we're faced with through time. The environmental crisis, although right now it seems like the most major crisis that human beings have ever faced, it may or may not be. It is certainly a serious crisis, and it's something that we need to deal with. But instead of seeing ourselves and our culture as really fucked up, that we've somehow gone off the rails in the process of our development, our evolutionary development, both physically and culturally, that instead of seeing, judging ourselves as being just really screwed up, that it might be useful to shift that paradigm and recognize that we are exactly what we are. That given the trajectory of the world, the biological and the thousands and thousands of years of cultural evolution, that we've come to the place that we necessarily have come to. I'm not saying it couldn't have been different, but it's not necessarily, a mistake. This is what is. And so the question isn't so much, I don't think, of comparing the horrors of what is to what we think it should be, but rather accepting things exactly as they are without allowing that to paralyze us. Because if we're constantly in a state of comparing and rejecting what actually is, it leads to burnout. And so, as far as I can tell, the fundamental ground of peace of mind is a profound surrender to how things actually are in each moment in the here and now. Notice that this doesn't mean that the way things are will be the way they will always be. Everything is always changing, and it's that process of change that have brought us to the way things are now. And so it's the process of change that will move us on, the natural, inherent, self-organizing process of change, of living systems that will move us forward. Part of that process is the growing awareness that there are serious problems. Part of that process is your own commitment to working towards change in your own life and change collectively in the larger life of society and the larger environmental world through collective action. That also is a fundamental part of the way the world is now. So the world isn't just problems, but it's this growing understanding and recognition of those problems and the commitment to address those problems. That too is part of the world we live in. As Wilber has pointed out, in these different stages of cognitive, emotional, spiritual development, there are different inherent worldviews that grow out of those cognitive states, and that this process of development takes time. And we're all at different stages of this process of development. And so if we can really take that to heart, then instead of condemning those that deny global warming, for example, or deny the effects of their own behavior, instead of thinking, boy, they're just screwed up, if we can try to understand the context in which they're living, the context in which these assessments, these realities, these behaviors actually make good sense, then we can hopefully engage with more people without a sense of judgment or superiority. But we just recognize that, oh yeah, all these different positions are inherent to the process of change. So the really fundamental issue that probably many of you are saying, right, Bob, but we just don't have time, right? Things are fraught with danger. These changes are upon us. And if we don't seriously change our ways right away, it's not gonna matter. We're down the tubes. Again, we don't know. Remember the blue-green algae, you know, and this is the perspective in which human beings may not be here for the whole trajectory of the development of life on Earth. The blue-green algae developed a new metabolic pathway, and the byproduct of that was oxygen, which was seriously poisonous to them. And so basically, they put themselves out of existence by their own being, their own metabolism, their own behavior, their own metabolic behavior. But in doing that, they opened up these enormous niches for everything that came after, all the air-breathing creatures of which we're part. So even if we destroy the environment for ourselves, I hope that won't happen because I like the environment. You know, I appreciate the beauty, and I hope that we're not in the process of destroying the earth as we know it. But even so, if we take the really big picture, we don't know what that might lead to, what astonishing life forms that might lead to that we can't even imagine. And so all of this isn't to suggest that we should just let go, because we are living here. We are human beings, and we do have a commitment to changing the way things are. But it's a way of addressing that sometimes fundamental sense of futility, and that, you know, we're just fucked. And to try to balance that with a perspective of don't know mind. We truly, in the deepest, deepest way, we don't know. Life is fundamentally a mystery, and we're not in charge. We're participants, and our job is to look deep within ourselves and follow our own call to do what we feel is the best in our lives. All right, I didn't mean to preach, but I just wanted to get that out there because I think it's part of what we live with.